If you're a first home buyer, you need to take advantage of what's happening in Australia's property market right now. I get asked this a lot. What would you have done differently if you started again, Luke? And it would have been take more advantage of the grants and schemes and discounts available as a first home buyer, and to do it in both my wife's and my personal name, rather than in joint names and using up all of that capacity in one go. So we're going to be talking about how you can take advantage as a first home buyer and make sure you're using the schemes available to you. Now, my name's Luke and I talk all things real estate, renovating and financial freedom here on the channel. If you could drop a like on this video and subscribe down below, that'd really help me out. And let's dive into today's talk about first home buyers. So the Palaszczuk government is backing first home buyers through increases in the first home owner grant scheme. The improved incentive includes doubling the first home owner grant, taking the total to $30,000 for eligible purchases. The $15,000 boost will come into effect for transactions entered into on or after Monday the 20th of November. The increase means Queenslanders will have access to the equal highest first home owner grant in Australia, triple the grants available in New South Wales and Victoria. So to be eligible for these grants, you need to be buying or building a new home, which is key, valued at less than $750,000, including land and contract variations. You must be 18 years or older and must be the first residential property you've owned here in Australia. The home must not have been lived in or sold as a place of residence at the time of completion. It could be a house or any other type of dwelling, and must be one of the following eligible transactions: a new home, off the plan, substantial renovation, contract to build, or owner builder. Now, this is great news. So that's step number one, is looking at that Queensland grant available for new homes or new builds. Now, I may not have used this, because there's some other things we're going to talk about today that could be useful to you in building your property portfolio. And Emily and I didn't use a builder's grant when we bought our first home. The reason is a lot of these new homes are in large land estates out in the middle of whoop whoop, up near Caboolture on the north side, or down near Pimpama on the south side, or out west towards Ipswich in the Ripley Valley area where there's a lot of land supply. And it doesn't mean, again, this is not a slight on anyone who lives in those areas. It's looking at the land supply story. If you buy a 250 or 350 square meter block with a new build on it, and your neighbor does the same thing a year later, and your neighbor does the same thing 2 years later, and then a street across from you is built 2 years, 3 years, 4 years later, and there's all this continual supply coming into the area of cookie cutter homes, that's where I don't like buying into these grants. Of course, it's good for the Queensland government to stimulate the economy, stimulate the building industry, and create more supply. But as a first home buyer, you may want to consider buying in the established market. So let's talk about some of the grants and schemes available to you if you're going to buy an established property rather than buying a new build. Number two on the list is a federal scheme called the Australian Government's Home Guarantee Scheme. So let's break that down. So normally, if you don't have a 20% deposit when you buy a home, you need to pay lender's mortgage insurance. But with the Australian Government's Home Guarantee Scheme, you could enter the property market with as little as a 2 or 5% deposit. So to be eligible for this scheme, you need to meet these criteria: be an Australian citizen or permanent resident, apply for an owner-occupied loan with P&I repayments. You need to have taxable income for up to $125K for single applicants and $200K for joint applicants based on the latest financial year's notice of assessment. You need to be a first home buyer. And you also can look at your situation in terms of your own family home, and you need to have a minimum of a 2% or a 5% deposit. So 5% is quite good. If you're buying a first home, you could put 25 to 50 grand down and buy a property between, say, 500 and 750K. So if you are buying a new build off the plan, you could get $30,000 from the Queensland government so far. And secondly, put down just a 5% deposit by getting access to this guarantee scheme from the federal government. So this is available if you're buying an established property as well, which is great. So if you're buying a $500,000 home in Queensland, that means you could put down $25,000. And that leads me into the next benefit, which is stamp duty concessions here in Queensland. So let's take a dive into first home concessions on stamp duty. So to keep this one short and sweet, if you want a full first home concession, so to pay no stamp duty here in Queensland, buy a home less than $500,000. Between $500,000 and $550K, it's a scaling system up to the full stamp duty amount from $550K onwards. Now, the great thing is if you're able to buy a home for around 500K, you could put down 25 grand, which would be your 5% deposit, and then you could hold and buy a property for $500,000. Of course, you need to live in this home for generally around 6 to 12 months to make it your own home before potentially turning it into an investment. But this can give you a foot into the property market. And think in that first 6 to 12 months, if you buy it with 25 grand down, you could potentially spend 50K on renovations and add value to that property significantly. So this is a great strategy for people to get their foot in the door and then add value and create value through that first 12 months. Then you can move back home with the parents or move back renting and try and find a cheaper place to live and rent out your first home as an investment property from year 1 onwards. Now, it just gets better if you're a first home buyer because there's another scheme here called the First Home Super Saver Scheme. Now, the great thing about the First Home Super Saver Scheme is it's another way to save on taxes and build up your deposit faster. The long story short of it is you can make pre-tax deductions into your superannuation, reducing your taxes and use your super money then to go towards your first home purchase. So let's say you earn $1,000 a week, you can make additional contributions each year, generally up to a $15,000 or $30,000 cap in total. And then you're able to draw that money back out of your super to use those funds as a deposit on your first home. So if you're building a new home in Queensland, you can now get access to $30,000 of grants from the Queensland government. The federal government will then potentially allow you to put down a 5% deposit for your first home, waiving LMI. If you buy a home under 500K, you won't have to pay stamp duty. And if you're willing to use the First Home Super Saver Scheme, you can reduce your taxes and build up a deposit faster. So there are plenty of schemes and grants out there to allow you to break into the market. Now, to reveal to you what Emily and I did is we put down a $60,000 deposit to buy our very first home. And we used the First Home Super Saver Scheme. We missed out on the stamp duty concessions. We didn't use the first home grants. We didn't use any other types of grants and concessions other than the First Home Super Saver Scheme. And we had to pay overs on our fees and rates at that point in time. But we were able to break into the market and add value through renovations. We also had a very strong savings track record. So Emily and I were able to save money quickly to push towards our renovations and add value to the home. So look at your own situation. Can you get access to these grants and concessions and schemes and use them to your advantage if you're a first home buyer? And if you're a couple, maybe think about it strategically, especially if you're both on decent incomes, around that 80 to 100K mark, then potentially both of you could break into the market, both getting benefits of these schemes. And that's the big thing that Emily and I would have done differently if we started again. We could have potentially split our money and both bought a property each to get into the property market faster. So I'd love to hear from you in the comments below if you are a first home buyer. What are some of the struggles that you're facing when it comes to buying a property in the Australian market? And I hope you got massive value out of me talking you through these schemes and grants. So if you could drop a like on this video, subscribe to the channel, and click this video over here for more things real estate, renovating, and financial freedom. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.